ARPA on the forefront of yet another legal challenge.
If they had said any abortion-related information that is personal or private, for example, the names of the abortionists or the names of the women having these abortions, then of course we would say that's totally reasonable for a government to protect the privacy of those individuals. But when they say, we will not even give you the number of dollars that we spent last year on abortion, that's unreasonable.
We'll have a feature interview on that issue later in the program. As part of the announcement of that lawsuit, ARPA chapters from across Southern Ontario converged on Queen's Park, the Ontario legislature, last week with another pro-life flag display. We'll talk to the person who organized that. Also, now that there's been some time to analyze the so-called Carter decision on assisted suicide, ARPA has a major action item for you to engage in. And a little something from last week's federal budget that you probably weren't aware of.
And now, Lighthouse News. Lighthouse News is a presentation of ARPA, the Association for Reform Political Action. Here's your host, Al Sebring.
ARPA is leading another legal challenge, this time on the issue of the way some provinces refuse to release abortion statistics. Both Ontario and BC have a so-called FIPA, that's Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, but both of those laws say that when people are filing requests for information, they shouldn't waste their time asking for statistics on the number of abortions done in those provinces. Those numbers are explicitly excluded from the Freedom of Information part of the Acts. Pro-life blogger Patricia Maloney launched a lawsuit against the secrecy in Ontario last year, and the Ontario government essentially caved on a one-time basis to her request for some of the statistics, and then argued that because the information was provided, the lawsuit was no longer valid. Now, ARPA and We Need a Law are relaunching the lawsuit. Mike Schutten with We Need a Law says there's nothing unreasonable about asking for those statistics.
How do you achieve justice for people you don't even know exist or are not even registered? You know, in order to develop good public policy, you need proper information. For example, millions and millions of dollars are poured into safe sex programs. We have no idea as to the effectiveness of those programs. We have no idea how many teens are getting pregnant. We have no idea how many women are going back once, twice, 3 times to their family doctor or gynecologist with complications. So how do you address any of those issues, which we know anecdotally are out there, but we have no clue as to the actual stats as to what's going on?
Later in the program, we'll have a feature interview with ARPA lawyer Andre Schutten and Patricia Maloney, the woman who launched the initial suit. ARPA chapters in Southern Ontario used the occasion of the announcement of that lawsuit at Queen's Park last week to stage another flag display. Nikki Pennings helped to organize the event.
About 6 o'clock in the morning, we had volunteers showing up from all over Southern Ontario. We had the 100,000 flags, so we did that for the first time in Ottawa last October. And then we've been doing smaller displays of 10,000 flags in smaller communities. But we thought with this many volunteers and at the Ontario legislature where they've been censoring abortion statistics, we said, you know what, we want to show them the full 100,000 flags and that each flag represents one life lost in abortion every year.
Nikki says this display was a bit different from the one in Ottawa last year. Instead of sticking the flags into the lawn at the legislature, they just laid them down.
We said, can we use your property on this date? And they said, yep, with one provision, you're not allowed to pierce the ground. That's a rule that they have. So we decided to proceed with the flag display by laying them out and thought, you know what? These flags, if laid down intentionally in a pattern, we laid them intentionally down in rows, sort of like a cemetery, saying that this is symbolic of all of the lives that are being lost every year in abortion. And the visual impact was far beyond what we had expected. We were worried that it wasn't going to be as powerful. And we had a lady who walked by during setup. She said to one of the volunteers, I've been here for 20 years, and this is by far the most powerful display I have ever seen.
It's been a few months since the Supreme Court issued the so-called Carter decision, the one that struck down Canada's law against doctor-assisted suicide. ARPA's been busy analyzing that ruling and last week presented a new policy paper on the issue, which makes some suggestions on how Parliament should deal with the ruling. Executive Director Mark Penninga says it's important the government do something because the ruling expressly gave Parliament just a year to act on this. If there's no new law by early next year, we'll end up with the same situation as what happened with the abortion question, where the High Court told Parliament to rewrite the old law They didn't, and now there's no law at all. As to what a new law should look like, the policy paper suggests it should do everything possible, including, if necessary, the use of the notwithstanding clause to protect the sanctity of life. Bennigan says, failing that, there should be at least a very detailed look at the whole issue, which would probably take longer than the single year the Supreme Court mandated in its ruling.
If they're unwilling to stand up for human life, then we say the second option would be to use Section 33 of the Charter with the purpose of starting a royal commission, an extensive study that the government conducts. They've done this, for example, with assisted human reproductive technologies, and that gives them time to study the issue in depth before they come up with any policy.
And what if they don't want to do that either? Well, there are some other less preferred options.
If they absolutely insist that they're going to plow ahead and enact a law which allows assisted suicide, then we provide, I think, 12 or 13 different suggestions on things that law must include to mitigate the evil.
There's an easy mail on this at the ARPA website. The policy paper has also been sent to all MPs in Ottawa. Bennigan says if you run into your own MP on the spring or summer barbecue circuit, it wouldn't hurt to ask them if they've read that paper and to remind them that this issue is important to you. One more thing from Ottawa. There was a federal budget last week. You probably heard all about it by now. Increases in limits on tax-free savings accounts, more money to fight terrorism, and a promise of more infrastructure funding for municipal governments. But Ray Pennings over at Cardis went digging through the budget, and he found something that you probably weren't aware of, a $37 million expansion to the so-called compassionate care